So I did a video last week where I asked the audience here, what red-pilled you? Because I'm interested in what really changes people's minds. When I look at my social world, like at work and stuff, you can basically break people up into thirds. There's the third that is way down the rabbit hole and is point by point by point on top of everything that comes out. There's a third that are just completely hopeless out there in blue pill la-la land. And then there's a third that really just are in the middle and maybe potential converts, but they're lacking information. And so thank you to everyone that responded and explained, what was it that woke you up? Because it was interesting, I got a couple of Tim Pools just getting different information that contradicted the mainstream narrative. I saw it just got so over the top with racist, bigot, homophobe, everything, everywhere, and remaking movies with women instead of men. And then, of course, there was just various eye-opening experiences when you're exposed to information that shatters a primary mainstream narrative. And so I thought I'd share my kind of personal journey towards, I guess you'd call it being red-pilled. So I was raised in a family, and it was we were libertarian-ish, conservative, libertarian type, but it wasn't real overt. We didn't talk a lot of politics. And I remember going into the late 90s, Craig Kilborn had been doing The Daily Show. Back in those days, you watched anything, it was on TV. And I remember he left and Jon Stewart replaced him. And I liked jokes, I liked to laugh, and Jon Stewart was a funny guy back then, and so that was kind of my initial exposure to any sort of politics, 17, 18 years old, and I really didn't think about it all that much. And then my parents set me up to probably one of the most liberal cities in Western Washington where I went to college, and I was completely surrounded by it, and I thought I was fairly, I wasn't drinking the dandelion wine and walking around with all the hippies barefoot, mostly because those were the rich kids and I was far from being one of them. But while I didn't see myself as part of this really far left hippie trippy stuff, I saw myself as comfortably on the left. The events of 7/11 occurred, and we saw the rush to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to me it was like, well, if George Bush is a Republican, I'm certainly not that. If Dick Cheney is Republican, I'm certainly not that. And I really didn't put a whole lot more thought into it than that. Now in college, I really liked music. That's when Napster first came out. My music library went from a collection of maybe 15 CDs to being able to download just hard drives full of songs. And if they were on campus, you could get them in like 30 seconds, which was record time back in those days. You'd set up a download, walk away, and come back 2 hours later, you might have a song. So it was really cool, and I started getting all this music, and I started listening to all this punk rock, because that's what a lot of these guys that had music on campus had. And I didn't even know what the lyrics meant. NoFX had their song Reagan Sucks, and I remember thinking, who thinks about Ronald Reagan these days? I didn't understand any of the ideology, but I got into the Bad Religion, NoFX, Anti-Flag, and I liked the music. I liked rock music. Seattle had been a real exciting place in the early 90s with Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam. And so it's just kind of a natural exploration of the music that was out there. Didn't think any more about the entertainment industry than that. And then I remember I graduated and I was going to go to a concert called Warped Tour, and it was in Eastern Washington, and none of my friends were interested in this music. Nobody wanted to go, so I went by myself. And Washington doesn't look like that big of a state, but if you drive from Western Washington all the way to Eastern Washington, it's a pretty long drive. So I got up, I drove, I forget what it was, 6 hours or something to get to the Gorge. And I remember walking around it's this big punk rock show, and all these people were so weird. They were every outcast and weirdo and freak I'd seen at college but didn't hang out with. And then the bands were playing. There was stage after stage, and they all sucked. Like, nobody could make good music. So finally I stayed there, around 5 o'clock in the evening. The big name bands started coming out. One of the bands I was really excited to see was Anti-Flag. I had no concept of what they stood for. They had a really good bassist and some really cool riffs, and I wanted to see them live. And so they got up on stage, and I remember being like, oh, I hope they play this song and this song and this song. I really want to see how they play this. But instead of playing, the lead singer, whose name is Justin Sane, very clever that one, starts going on this rant. And mind you, this is 2005 era. If you in any way oppose gay marriage, or you're a racist, or you're an on, I remember thinking, okay, yeah, I heard all this at college, like, get to your songs. But he didn't. They were playing 30-minute sets, and 12 minutes in, this guy was still ranting and raving, and they hadn't played a single note. And everyone was, like, cool with it. They were into it. I was like, what's going on? I drove 6 hours, 7 hours to get here. And then so finally, after about 15 minutes of ranting, they played one song, and it was, like, the most generic song of all. If they had a radio song, it would have been their radio-friendly song, and I was so let down. And they might have played one more song, and then it was back to ranting for like another 10 minutes. I think in the total of their 30-minute set, they might have only played their instruments for 7 minutes or so. And I remember just being so bummed out, and then Bad Religion got out there, and they rocked, and they did very little talking. Although during the Kyoto Now, which I had no idea what the Kyoto Treaty was, I remember the line Greg Graffin points at the sun, and he says, a brutal sun is setting on a sick horizon. And I remember thinking, no, it's a pretty beautiful sunset. What is this Kyoto Now? And then the last band I waited to see was NoFX, and they got up and they're like, well, there isn't a whole lot that Anti-Flag hasn't said that we haven't said, but... And then they went in and started ranting, and I remember I just got up and left in the middle of this set, or rant, and I remember walking back to my car, and I was thinking, I don't belong here. Like, this isn't me. This isn't my people, my culture, my beliefs. I'm all for leaving people alone and letting them live how they want to live, but this was just, it was too angry. And I didn't want to be a part of it. So I remember slowly walking back to my car, and NoFX had finally started to play some stupid song. And I just got in and I started the long drive home. Long 7-hour drive home. And the next day, I remember I was recently out of college, moved back home with my folks, and I'm sitting there before dinner watching Bill O'Reilly with my dad, and I thought, I don't really agree with this guy on a whole lot either, but he seems a lot more aligned with how I think and feel than the lunatics I just saw yesterday at the concert. And so around this time, 05, 06, YouTube started coming out. It started getting bigger and bigger. And I remember stumbling across guys like Stefan Molyneux, and I would go down these rabbit holes. In those days, it didn't recommend CNN coming up next. It was, you could just start on one topic and go down this list, like the truth about Gandhi, the truth about Nelson Mandela, and all these stories I'd been told in a liberal arts college and basically a leftist education before that, and just debunked. And it was like, wow. It was when I began to realize that, I'm a little bit more right-wing than I thought. And then I remember Ron Paul running for office in 2008, and it cracked me up because you had all these Republicans, and they'd be like Romney and Giuliani, and all these guys would be like, liar, 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 just political talking points, boring old speeches. And then it would get to this little old guy, and he would just drop truth bombs for 90 straight seconds, and then they'd go to the next liar. And all these other candidates stood there stupidly like they didn't even just hear this guy drop straight knowledge for the last minute and a half. And after a while, I started laughing every time they got to Ron Paul, because I was like, who is this guy? It's like when you just are lied to, and then the clear ring of truth just cuts through all the BS. And so I started watching all these Ron Paul videos, and I started learning a lot about that and the Federal Reserve and waking up to that. But there was always the fringe conspiracies. I didn't believe in any of that stuff. That was just crazy people, like the 7-Eleven stuff. And it's funny to see how I was gatekept. I was gatekept in a combination between Joe Rogan and South Park. And this was Joe Rogan, I think, is actually doing pretty good work with the Rona and getting truth out there. But in those days, who knows? he was talking about the 7-Eleven truthers and how the conspiracy theorists were all hyperventilating, and you got to look at the melting point of steel and the, jet fuel, and then they'd have the engineers and they'd be calm and reasoned. Mind you, I didn't listen to this interview. I just listened to Joe Rogan talk about it. And then South Park did a 7-Eleven conspiracy theory video where, of course, Cartman was the conspiracist. And I literally didn't look into it beyond that because I was like, oh, these guys wouldn't lie to me, so there must be nothing to it. And then I remember watching Owen Benjamin get kicked out of Hollywood, and he got very deep into it. And I was like, okay, I'm okay with some of these conspiracies. I can see that being true and that being true. I considered myself pretty red pill. And then he got on this moon landing kick, and I just kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, oh, come on. But then there was one fact that just I couldn't shake. It was the phone call from the surface of the moon to Nixon in the White House, 250,000 miles away on a landline. And I was like, how did they do that? You can't even make a phone call from a submarine 100 feet underwater. How are we calling in 1969 from the surface of the moon on a telephone? And it's crystal clear as day. And maybe Daniel Pettit is right. We had that technology and then we lost it, and it's a painful process to build it back. I won't make any claims. I don't know what's true and not true. But it was like that little niggling question. I couldn't let it go, and I started looking into, maybe there's more to these conspiracies than I thought. And it was time after time after time you run into these gaping holes in the narrative. And of course, I don't believe them all, but my mind is certainly open to the idea that there's partial truth or a heck of a lot more truth to all of them. I mean, Building 7 collapsing due to melting office furniture. Are you kidding me? And once you even consider the fact that that might have been pre-planned, it's like that opens a whole new world. But you can see it, it's so in your face now. I mean, these poor people being held without being charged because of what happened in January in America off of a fake narrative. You see the sanctification of George Floyd, who just died from a drug overdose. You saw the public attempted execution of poor Kyle. And some people even claim that's an op. I don't know at this point, but I'm aware, I'm awake, I'm paying attention, I question everything. And it almost seems like conspiracies have become the great American pastime. I mean, those of us in the know, like at work, are just joking about it constantly. And that's what I think the Great Reset is. The whole point is to reestablish those gatekeepers, reestablish that gang of 500, the journalists that set narratives and set stories, that full spectrum dominance, that complete and total control. You notice the Biden diary or laptop aren't stories at all when it comes to the mainstream news because they don't want people talking about it. The point of the Great Reset is to reset things back to that old world order that worked out so well for the Hillary Clintons of the world. Hillary Clinton, who, funny enough, just lamented the lack of gatekeepers out there. And so I think this is how we do it. It's fun. People will gravitate to the party that's more fun and away from those that are moralistically condemning everyone as being Russian, and all that nonsense. And how long does it take? Well, we don't know how long it takes, how many videos, how much information, but people are all going to come by the truth sooner or later. Maybe not all, but enough people will come to the truth sooner or later. And so what we're going through is the birthing pains of an actual new world order, an actual gigantic paradigm shift. And I don't think it's going to be a utopia of any sort, but it's certainly got to be better than the one we're living in right now.